She was just a Brooklyn schoolteacher until the cold millionaire CEO from her childhood walked back into her life with a shocking proposal. What began as a contract would shatter her heart, risk her baby's life, and lead to a love neither of them ever expected. Hello, my friends. Before we begin this amazing story, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how your day is going. All right? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The heart of New York City. Beat in contrasting rhythms, a truth Claire Hayes knew intimately. Her world, nestled in a small but cheerful Brooklyn apartment, was a symphony of simple joys. As a primary school teacher, her days were painted in the scent of chalk dust, the bright colors of finger paintings, and the melodic chaos of children's laughter. She found profound purpose in nurturing young minds, a quiet fulfillment that soothed the rough edges of a life lived on a modest salary. Her contentment was genuine, a quilt, stitched together from routine and small kindnesses, yet beneath it lay a delicate, persistent thread of melancholy. It was the quiet hum of a question that had lingered for 15 years, a silent ache for a connection that had vanished like a whisper on the wind, leaving her feeling subtly, inexplicably incomplete. Tucked away in a small wooden box on her dresser, next to a photo of her parents, was a tarnished silver locket shaped like a sun. It was a relic from a sun-drenched childhood. Summer, a promise made with the solemn gravity only children possess. It represented a bond with a boy whose life was the absolute antithesis of her own. A friendship that had been as intense as it was brief. She would sometimes hold the cool metal in her palm, the memory of his serious eyes and quiet smile flooding back with a bittersweet pang. Her life was good, filled with meaning and warmth, but she carried the ghost of that long-ago what if. It was the unspoken postscript to her story, a friendship that had disappeared without a single goodbye, leaving a permanent question mark etched upon her heart. Across the East River, in a sprawling, minimalist penthouse perched atop a glass tower on the Upper East Side, lived Julian Vance. Now 30, he was the designated heir to Vance Heritage, a formidable real estate empire that had carved its name into the city's skyline. His world was a fortress of polished chrome, stark white walls, and immense, suffocating pressure. Groomed from birth by his formidable and controlling grandfather, Arthur Vance, Julian was a man forged in the crucible of ruthless expectation. To the world, he was the epitome of success, a calculating, emotionally detached magnate who moved markets with a single phone call. This reputation, meticulously cultivated, was less a reflection of his true self and more a suit of armor he never dared to remove. His penthouse, overlooking the vast expanse of Central Park, was not a home, but a gallery of his achievements, as cold and impersonal as a modern art museum. He was surrounded by unimaginable wealth, but steeped in a profound, echoing loneliness. His life was a gilded cage, and the key was firmly in the grasp of his grandfather, whose legacy and approval were the twin pillars upon which Julian's entire identity had been constructed. He was feared by his rivals and respected by his subordinates, but no one was ever allowed to get close. The boy who had once shared secrets under a summer sky was buried deep beneath layers of corporate steel, walled off from a world he observed but never truly felt a part of. The inevitable collision of their separate universes occurred on a crisp autumn day in a bustling Soho cafe. Claire, treating herself to a rare, expensive latte, was curled up in a worn leather armchair, watching the vibrant city life unfold outside the window. The air inside was thick with the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans and the low hum of creative chatter. Across the room, a man in a bespoke suit that likely cost more than her monthly rent was closing a multi-million-dollar deal, his voice a sharp, authoritative blade cutting through the ambient noise. He was the physical embodiment of power and privilege, a king in his natural habitat, and Claire felt a familiar sense of being a world away from such lives. He ended his call with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire empire, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. It was a gesture of weary triumph, a crack in the polished veneer. His gaze, momentarily unfocused, swept across the room, and then, with the force of a physical impact, it locked with hers. For a dizzying second, there was only confusion in his intense, serious eyes, the very same eyes she had committed to memory so long ago. Then, a flash of raw, unfiltered disbelief shattered his cold facade, a look so vulnerable it stole the air from her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped, a bird. A single name escaped her lips, a sound barely audible above the clatter of cups. Julian? The reaction was instantaneous and electric. He stood so abruptly that his chair screeched against the polished concrete floor, nearly toppling over. The carefully constructed mask of the powerful CEO dissolved completely, replaced by the stunned, unguarded expression of the boy she once knew, the boy who had given her a silver sun. "Claire?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in over a decade. He took a hesitant step toward her, the bustling cafe and its patrons fading into an insignificant blur around them. In that single, breathtaking moment, the 15 years of silence and the vast, unbridgeable chasm of social class between them simply ceased to exist. There was only the raw, undeniable shock of reconnection, a jolt that reset the world for them both. The boy from the park and the girl with the locket, now a man forged by pressure, and a woman shaped by quiet resilience, stood staring at each other as if they were ghosts. The powerful current of their shared past pulled them into a pocket of silence, a bubble in time where the noise of their present lives could not penetrate. He saw the same warmth in her eyes that he remembered, a kindness he hadn't encountered since he'd been forced to trade his summers for boardrooms. She saw, beneath the expensive suit and the aura of command, the flicker of the lonely boy she had promised. She would never forget. In his eyes, she saw not just recognition, but a desperate drowning sort of relief. It was as if he had been holding his breath for 15 years and could finally exhale. The air between them crackled with everything left unsaid, with the weight of 1,000 questions that had been buried by time and circumstance. Why did you leave? Where did you go? Do you remember? The single word of his name, spoken in her voice, had been the key that unlocked a door he had long since bricked over. The Julian Vance who commanded boardrooms had vanished, and in his place was just Julian, a boy standing before a girl who held a piece of his forgotten heart. The encounter was an earthquake, shaking the foundations of the carefully constructed lives they had both built in the intervening years. For Claire, it was the return of a ghost she had learned to live with, now made flesh and blood, impossibly real and standing just a few feet away. For Julian, it was a confrontation with the person he had been before the world had molded him into something else, a stark reminder of a time when his value wasn't measured in stock prices and acquisitions. The inciting incident wasn't just a meeting, it was an excavation, unearthing a shared history that was about to demand its due from their carefully managed present, promising to change everything. Acting on an impulse he hadn't felt in years, a force that felt dangerously like hope, Julian insisted on dinner. He couldn't let this slip away. Not again. That evening, he sent a car to her Brooklyn address, a sleek black sedan that looked alien on her quiet street. It transported her to a world of hushed elegance in an exclusive midtown restaurant, a place where the waiters moved with silent precision, and the wine list was thicker than any book in her apartment. The opulence was a language she didn't speak, and Claire felt a profound sense of dislocation. her simple dress a stark contrast to the couture that surrounded her. Julian, however, navigated this world with an innate, almost weary ease, a prince in his ancestral castle, oblivious to the chasm that separated their realities. He waited until the appetizers were served, his hands resting on the crisp white tablecloth, his posture exuding a practiced calm that didn't reach his eyes. "Claire, I didn't just happen to be in that cafe," he began, his voice low and serious. "I've been looking for you. For months." He then unburdened himself, the words spilling out in a controlled but desperate torrent. He spoke of his grandfather, Arthur Vance, whose health was failing rapidly, a lion in winter still roaring commands. He explained the brutal, archaic clause in the family trust. Julian had to produce a legitimate heir within 1 year of his grandfather's passing, or the Vance heritage would be fractured, carved up by corporate rivals and, most menacingly, his opportunistic and resentful cousin, Marcus. Then came the final, devastating blow, the one that stripped away the last vestiges of the boy she remembered and left a desperate man in his place. "There's a complication," Julian said, his gaze dropping to the table. "A significant one. According to the best doctors money can buy, I'm sterile." The word hung in the air between them, cold and heavy. "My grandfather's legacy, my entire life's purpose, it all hinges on something I'm physically incapable of producing." He looked at her then, his eyes pleading, stripped of all their corporate armor. "I need an heir, Claire, and I need a mother for that child, someone I can trust, someone good. The only person I could think of was you." His proposal was as clinical as a medical procedure, delivered with the dispassionate logic of a business negotiation. He wasn't asking for her heart or her partnership. He was presenting a contractual obligation. He spoke of using an anonymous donor for the insemination, of legal agreements drafted by the best lawyers in the country to protect them both. He laid out a financial package that would grant her security for the rest of her life, a sum so vast it seemed unreal, enough to erase any worry she or her family might ever have. "You would never have to worry about money again," he stated, as if that were the only metric of happiness that mattered. "The child would be legally mine, but you would be compensated beyond measure for your sacrifice." The words struck Claire with the force of a physical slap. The warmth of their reunion in the cafe curdled into something ugly and cold. This wasn't the boy from her past reaching out to reconnect. This was a powerful, desperate man trying to acquire a solution. All her insecurities, her feeling of being from a different, lesser world, crystallized into a single painful realization. He saw her not as the girl he once shared secrets with, but as a viable, trustworthy vessel. "Compensated," she whispered, the word tasting like poison. "You're talking about a child, Julian, a human life, not a corporate merger." The hurt was a sharp, physical pain in her chest, a betrayal that felt deeper than 15 years of silence ever could. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held a fire he hadn't anticipated. "Do you hear yourself? You're sitting here in this palace, putting a price tag on a miracle. You think because I'm a teacher from Brooklyn that my life, my body, my future is for sale." Each word was a precise, painful dart. The boy I knew would have been horrified. He would have never commodified something so sacred. She pushed her chair back, the sound grating in the hushed restaurant. She looked at him one last time, at the powerful CEO who had completely erased the friend she had cherished. "I'm sorry for your problem, Julian. I truly am, but you'll have to find someone else to buy." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him utterly alone amidst the splendor. Her rejection was a bucket of ice water, shocking him out of his calculated desperation. Sitting alone in the silent, cavernous restaurant, Julian felt the weight of her words crash down upon him. The boy I knew would have been horrified. She was right. That boy, the one who believed in promises and silver lockets, would have been disgusted by the cold, transactional man he had become. For the first time in years, Julian saw his reflection not as a symbol of power, but as something hollow and broken. He had approached the one person from his past who represented warmth and authenticity and had treated her like a line item in a budget. The realization was a profound and deeply humbling failure. The following weeks marked a seismic shift in his strategy, born not from a corporate playbook, but from a place of genuine remorse. He began a different kind of pursuit, one that had nothing to do with contracts or compensation. He didn't send flowers or expensive gifts, which he knew would only reinforce her view of him. Instead, he showed up outside her school one afternoon, holding 2 cups of coffee from the small, independent shop near her apartment that she'd mentioned in the cafe. He didn't bring up his predicament. He just stood there looking uncertain and said, "I was in the neighborhood. I thought you might like one." It was a simple human gesture, and it disarmed her more than any grand display ever could. He started to appear in her world, cautiously and respectfully. He would ask about her day, listening with an intensity she hadn't expected. As she told him about a student who finally learned to read or a funny mishap with a class art project. He asked about her parents, her dreams, the life she had built in the 15 years they'd been apart. He was slowly, painstakingly shedding his corporate armor, revealing glimpses of the lonely, overwhelmed man beneath. He never once mentioned the proposal, focusing instead on rebuilding the fragile bridge of their friendship. He was no longer the CEO of Vance Heritage. He was just Julian, trying to apologize without words. Claire remained guarded, the sting of his initial offer a constant throbbing wound. Her pride screamed at her to keep him at a distance, to protect her heart from the man who had so carelessly tried to buy a piece of it. Yet her compassion was at war with her pride. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the genuine pain that his wealth and power could not erase. In his quiet questions and his patient listening, she began to recognize faint echoes of the boy. From the park, the friend she had missed for so long, now trapped inside this powerful, lonely stranger. Her heart ached for that boy, for the man he was struggling to be. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. He had shown up with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, looking drenched and exhausted. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before he finally spoke, his voice quiet and raw. "I was a coward, Claire. The diagnosis, it terrified me, and I used it as a blunt instrument to try and force you into my life because I was too afraid to just ask, too afraid you'd say no to just me." His vulnerability was a key, turning the lock on her resolve. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not an emperor, but a man drowning. It was her deep, lingering affection for him, a love she realized had never truly died, that made her reconsider. "Okay, Julian," she said softly, the words feeling momentous. "I'll do it." He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "But not for the money," she clarified, her voice firm. "We tear up that contract. This isn't a business deal. I'm doing this for you, for the friend I remember, because I can't stand to see you so broken." In that moment, the power dynamic shifted entirely. She was no longer a potential asset. She was his rescuer. He agreed to her terms without hesitation, a wave of gratitude so profound it left him speechless. It was a new contract, one written not on paper, but on a foundation of shared history and her incredible grace. The early days of the pregnancy were a landscape of scheduled appointments and polite, formal interactions. They were partners in a delicate, surreal project, navigating the clinical world of fertility clinics and medical checkups. He would accompany her to every appointment, sitting in sterile waiting rooms, his powerful presence seeming out of place amongst the hopeful, anxious couples. They spoke of logistics, of vitamins, and dietary recommendations. It was a fragile truce, a careful dance around the raw emotions that simmered just beneath the surface. They were bound by a monumental secret, a child that was both a contract and a miracle, and the weight of it created a strange, unspoken intimacy between them. As weeks turned into months, The rigid formality began to soften and fray at the edges. After a late-night appointment, he started staying for dinner. Her small, warm Brooklyn apartment became a sanctuary for him, a refuge from his cold, empty penthouse. Surrounded by her books, the lingering scent of cinnamon, and the general happy clutter of a life well lived, he began to relax. He would shed his suit jacket, roll up his sleeves, and talk. He spoke of the crushing weight of his grandfather's expectations, of the constant corporate warfare with his cousin Marcus, of the profound isolation of his position. He confided in her, and she simply listened, offering a quiet understanding no one else in his life could. Claire, in turn, found herself opening up to him. She shared stories of her students, her passion for teaching, and her own quiet dreams for the future. Dreams that now felt impossibly complicated. He was fascinated by her world, so different from his own. "You create things," he told her one evening, watching her grade papers at her small kitchen table. "You build futures for those kids. I just acquire buildings." In these shared evenings, surrounded by the mundane reality of her life, they began to rediscover each other. The powerful CEO and the humble teacher faded away, leaving just Julian and Claire, two old friends navigating an extraordinary situation. The pregnancy progressed, and with it, their connection deepened. He became attuned to her needs, showing up with a specific brand of ginger ale that eased her morning sickness or a soft pillow for her aching back. He read pregnancy books with the same focus he applied to market analyses, quoting statistics about fetal development. With the nerdy enthusiasm that made her laugh, her apartment, once solely her own, began to show subtle signs of his presence. His favorite brand of coffee in her cupboard, a copy of the Wall Street Journal on her coffee table. They were building a life together in fragments, a mosaic of shared moments and quiet care. A pivotal moment arrived during her 5th month. They were sitting on her couch, watching an old movie, when the baby delivered a sudden, powerful kick. Claire gasped, placing a hand on her stomach. Julian's eyes, full of alarm, shot to her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "He's just saying hello," she said softly. "Here." She took his hand, her heart pounding, and placed it on the spot. He was hesitant, his touch incredibly gentle, almost reverent. And then it happened again. A distinct, undeniable flutter against his palm. A look of pure, unadulterated wonder transformed Julian's face. The cool, controlled businessman vanished completely, replaced by a man witnessing a miracle. A slow smile spread across his lips, so genuine and full of light it made Claire's breath catch in her throat. "Wow," he whispered, his eyes locked on her stomach. He didn't pull his hand away. In that shared, sacred silence, feeling the kick of the life they were creating together, the last vestiges of their contract dissolved into dust. This was not a business arrangement. This was a family in its nascent, most fragile stage. The touch was more than just physical. It was an emotional bridge, connecting their two disparate worlds in the most profound way imaginable. Their scheduled meetings bled into comfortable evenings and then into entire weekends. He helped her assemble the crib, arguing good-naturedly over the confusing instructions. She found herself soothing him after a particularly brutal phone call with his grandfather, making him tea and letting him vent his frustrations in the safety of her living room. They fell into a rhythm of domesticity that was both terrifying and thrilling. They would cook together, his methodical chopping a stark contrast to her more creative messiness. They were playing house, and they both knew it, but the pretense felt more real than anything else in their lives. One Saturday, they found themselves reminiscing about their childhood, prompted by Claire finding the silver sun locket while cleaning. "I can't believe you kept it," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he held it in his hand. "I remember the day I gave it to you. I saved up my allowance for 2 months." She smiled. "And I remember you promised you'd write. I waited for a letter for a whole year." The playful accusation in her voice was gentle, but it hit its mark. "My father intercepted them," he admitted quietly. "He said a Vance shouldn't be corresponding with, well, he didn't approve." It was a small confession, but it filled in a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the hurt she had carried for so long. He began to see her not just as the mother of his child, but as his partner in every meaningful way. She challenged his cynical worldview, celebrated his small victories against his grandfather's control, and saw the good in him that even he had forgotten existed. He, in turn, cherished her warmth and fiercely protected her peace, handling any external pressures before they could reach her. He started to hate leaving her apartment to return to his sterile penthouse, which now felt more like a tomb than ever before. The silence there was no longer peaceful. It was a screaming void where Claire's laughter should have been. They were building a bond that defied definition. It was more than friendship, yet not quite a declared romance. It was a unique and powerful connection forged in the crucible of their bizarre circumstances. He would watch her, asleep on the couch with a book on her chest, her face soft in the lamplight, and feel a surge of protectiveness and affection so intense it frightened him. He was falling in love with her, not just the memory of the girl she was, but the incredible woman she had become. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that giving up the baby might be the contractual agreement, but giving up her was becoming an impossibility. Claire found herself in a similar state of emotional turmoil. She had agreed to this for the sake of a broken friend, a noble, selfless act. But the lines had blurred so completely that she could no longer tell where the act ended and her own feelings began. She loved the way he looked at her stomach with such awe, the way he listened to her, the way his presence made her small apartment feel safer and more complete. She would catch herself imagining a future, not the one in the contract, but a real one, with him, with their baby. The thought was a dangerous, seductive whisper, one she tried to silence, terrified of the heartbreak that would surely follow when their arrangement came to its inevitable end. Their relationship had become the central truth of their lives, eclipsing the corporate empires and classroom routines that had once defined them. It was a quiet, unfolding love story, written in shared meals, late-night conversations, and the gentle press of his hand on her growing belly. The contract was a ghost, a forgotten document in a lawyer's filing cabinet somewhere. The reality was here, in the warm glow of her living room, where two lonely people, brought together by a desperate lie, were accidentally building a fragile, beautiful truth. The world outside, with its judgments and expectations, was a storm gathering on the horizon, but for now they had found a precarious peace in the eye of their own hurricane. Their fragile, growing intimacy, a secret garden cultivated in the heart of Brooklyn, was inevitably threatened by the harsh climate of Julian's world. His grandfather, Arthur Vance, upon learning of the arrangement, was apoplectic. From his throne of old money and rigid tradition, he saw Claire as nothing more than a commoner, a Brooklyn girl, woefully unsuitable to be associated with the Vance name, even in such an unconventional capacity. "You have introduced a variable, Julian," he had warned, his voice like gravel. "Sentiment is a liability. This was meant to be a clean transaction, and you are muddying the waters with this attachment." His disapproval was a constant oppressive weight on Julian, the primary and most immediate antagonist, however, was Julian's cousin, Marcus Vance. He was slick, handsome, and possessed a superficial charm that masked a deep, festering resentment for Julian's position as heir. Marcus saw Claire not as a person, but as a pawn and a vulnerability. He was convinced she was a shrewd gold digger, a threat to what he secretly believed was his own rightful inheritance. He began a subtle campaign of sabotage, feeding his Uncle Arthur's prejudices with veiled comments about Claire's background and dropping hints about the potential for scandal. poisoning the well at every opportunity and watching with predatory glee. Marcus made his move one afternoon when Claire was leaving a doctor's appointment on the Upper East Side. He orchestrated a chance encounter, cornering her near the entrance. "Claire Hayes, isn't it? Marcus Vance?" he said with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "I just want to say, what you're doing for my cousin is remarkably charitable." His tone was thick with condescension. "In fact, I think your charity is being undervalued. Let's just say my side of the family would be willing to offer a substantially larger sum for you to simplify things, disappear gracefully after the birth. It would be a much cleaner outcome for everyone involved. Wouldn't you agree?" The humiliating offer, delivered with such casual cruelty, confirmed all of Claire's deepest fears. To them, she was a transaction, a problem to be managed and paid off. The warmth she had built with Julian felt like a fantasy, a naive dream in the face of this brutal reality. She felt the oppressive weight of the American class system, its unspoken rules and cruel judgments pressing down on her. She was an outsider, a temporary fixture in a world that would never truly accept her or the child she carried. She simply stared at Marcus, her face pale, and walked away without a word, his derisive offer echoing in her ears, a poison seeping into the foundations of her fragile happiness. The encounter with Marcus deeply unsettled her, making her retreat emotionally just as Julian was moving closer. By the 7th month of the pregnancy, their lives were almost completely intertwined. He spent more nights at her apartment than his own, and the rhythm of their domestic intimacy felt both thrillingly real and terrifyingly precarious. For Julian, the lines were no longer blurry. They were gone. He was irrevocably in love. The man who had walled off his own heart was now overwhelmed by a flood of emotion so powerful it terrified him. He saw his future not in a boardroom, but in Claire's warm, light-filled living room, with her and their child. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, the weight of his feelings became too much to bear. "Claire," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. He took her hand. "I need to say something, and I don't want you to misinterpret it. This isn't about gratitude. It's not about the baby, or the contract, or my family." He looked directly into her eyes, his own raw with sincerity. "I'm in love with you. I think I started falling in love with you all over again the second I saw you in that cafe. You've shown me what a real home feels like. You've brought back the part of me I thought was gone forever." Before she could process his words, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't the locket. It was a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfect diamond. "Tear up the contract," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "Marry me, Claire. Let's not be two people bound by an agreement. Let's be a family, a real one. Me, you, and our baby. Please." The proposal was a heartfelt, desperate plea, a total rejection of his grandfather's transactional worldview, and an embrace of the future he truly wanted. He was offering her his whole heart, the one he had guarded so fiercely for years. But Claire, still stinging from Marcus's venomous offer and plagued by her own deep-seated insecurities, couldn't accept it. She saw his proposal not as a culmination of love, but as a symptom of his situation. "Julian, no," she said, pulling her hand away as if the ring were burning hot. "You don't mean that. You're confusing gratitude with love. You're caught up in the emotion of all this, of the baby." Her voice was gentle but firm, laced with a profound sadness. She was protecting her own heart from what she believed was an inevitable crash. "You love the idea of this perfect, ready-made family. You don't love me? You can't." His face fell, the hope draining from his eyes, leaving behind a familiar look of pain. "That's not true, Claire. I know what I feel." But his words couldn't penetrate the wall of her fear. Her rejection was absolute, a heartbreaking refusal born not of a lack of feeling for him, but from the conviction that she could never truly belong in his world. that his love was a temporary illusion. She was convinced that once the baby was born and the crisis of the inheritance was averted, he would wake up from this dream and she would be left with the shattered pieces. She couldn't survive that, and so she broke his heart to save her own. The very next day, the emotional ground beneath them didn't just tremble, it vaporized. As Julian sat in his stark office, reeling from her rejection, he received an urgent, frantic call from his lawyer, who had just been contacted by the fertility clinic. "There's been an audit." "Julian," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "A data entry error from last year, a catastrophic one. They mixed up 2 patient files, 2 men with the surname Vance." The silence on the line stretched for an eternity before the lawyer delivered the final, world-altering blow. "Julian, your diagnosis was wrong. You were never sterile. You are, and have always been, perfectly capable of fathering a child." The news, which should have been a euphoric relief, landed like a bomb. He wasn't sterile. The entire premise of the last 7 months, the desperate search, the cold proposal, the contract, Claire's incredible sacrifice, all of it was built on a mistake, a clerical error, a lie. A wave of nausea washed over him as the implications crashed down. He wasn't relieved, he was horrified. He had convinced the woman he loved to carry a child for him, to endure the physical and emotional turmoil of pregnancy, all for a problem that had never even existed. He grabbed his keys and ran from the office, a single desperate thought consuming him. He had to get to Claire. He found her at her apartment packing a small bag. Her eyes were red-rimmed from the previous night. "Claire, stop. You have to listen to me," he said, breathless from his panicked sprint. "Something's happened. Something incredible. A mistake was made." He relayed the news from the clinic, the words tumbling out in a frantic, hopeful rush. He expected her to be shocked, maybe even laugh at the sheer, insane irony of it all. He hoped she would see it as a strange twist of fate, another bizarre chapter in their story that they could now navigate together, free from the original pretense. He could not have been more wrong. For Claire, the revelation was not a relief. It was the ultimate, annihilating betrayal. The color drained from her face. The entire foundation of her reality, the sacrifice she had made out of compassion for his pain, crumbled into dust. The narrative she had clung to, that she was helping a broken friend in his most desperate hour, was a fiction. Her deepest, most guarded insecurity, whispered to her by Marcus and her own self-doubt, was now a screaming, undeniable truth. She wasn't chosen for who she was, or for their shared history. She was chosen as a convenient biological solution to a problem that never, ever existed. "So all of this," she whispered, her voice a hollow, broken thing. "The pregnancy, me giving up my job, my body, it was all for nothing." Her gaze was distant, seeing the last 7 months replaying in her mind, now tainted and ugly. Every kind gesture, every shared laugh, every moment of intimacy was instantly recast in the harsh, cruel light of this new truth. The proposal from the night before now seemed like the most grotesque manipulation of all, a desperate attempt to keep her locked into the arrangement. The trust they had so carefully, painstakingly rebuilt was not just broken, it was annihilated. "No, Claire, it wasn't for nothing," he pleaded, reaching for her, but she flinched away from his touch as if he were a stranger. "It brought me back to you. It gave us this baby." But his words were meaningless now. The lie was too big, too fundamental. "It was all based on a lie, Julian," she said, her voice gaining a chilling strength born of pure devastation. "You didn't come to me because you loved me. You came to me because you were a coward. You found a convenient womb and you wrapped it in a story of lost friendship. And I believed you." She zipped the bag with a final decisive sound. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in your world of contracts and convenient lies." She looked at him, her eyes empty of the warmth he had come to depend on like oxygen. Last night, I thought my heart was breaking because I couldn't accept your love, but now I see there was no love to accept. It was just another part of the transaction. Believing his confession and proposal were just another calculated move in a game she never understood. She walked past him, pulling the door open. "Claire, please don't go," he begged, his voice cracking, the powerful CEO completely undone. "Our son. He's my son," she corrected, her voice like ice. "The one I'm carrying for a reason that doesn't even exist." She stepped out into the hallway, leaving him standing alone in the apartment that had, for a brief, beautiful time, felt like their home. He had lost her. The lie he had unknowingly built their new beginning upon had become the very thing that ended it. He was left with the silence, the half-assembled nursery, and the crushing weight of a truth that had arrived far too late. Severing all contact, Claire went to the one place she knew the Vance family couldn't easily reach her, a small rented room in a friend's house in a different borough. The emotional trauma of the revelation, the feeling of being utterly duped and discarded, was a violent shock to her system. That evening, a sharp, cramping pain seized her. Abdomen. It was too soon, far too soon. Alone and terrified, she felt the unmistakable signs of premature labor beginning. The world spun, her breath catching in a sob of pure fear for the tiny, fragile life inside her. The monumental lie had not only shattered their trust and broken their hearts, it had now endangered the life of the one innocent person in the entire arrangement. As Claire doubled over in pain, her phone silent and her connection to Julian completely severed, she was more alone than she had ever been. The climax of their story wasn't just a revelation, it was a detonation, and the fallout was only just beginning to rain down, threatening to wash away everything. The fight for their future was over. The fight for their son's life had just begun. Frantic with worry, Julian deployed every resource at his command, not as the CEO of Vance Heritage, but as a terrified man desperate to find the woman he loved. He bypassed corporate investigators, instead hiring a private firm, known for its discretion and speed. Within hours, they located her. She had checked into a public hospital in Queens under her own name, a place so far from his world that his family would never have thought to look. He raced there, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, fearing the worst. His fears were confirmed when he found the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. And there, through the sterile glass, he saw her. She was standing alone, a solitary, heartbreaking figure watching their tiny son fight for his life inside an incubator. The baby, whom the nurses had named Leo, was a fragile miracle, tethered to a web of wires and tubes. Claire looked exhausted, her face pale and etched with a grief so profound it was almost palpable. She was completely isolated in her fear and sorrow. At that moment, Julian's grandfather, Arthur, and a smug-looking Marcus arrived, having followed him. "Julian, this is a debacle," Arthur began, his voice laced with disdain. "Leave the girl. Our lawyers will handle the child." This was it, the moment of final reckoning. Julian turned to face them, his expression one of cold, hard finality. "There is nothing for you to handle," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through his grandfather's authority like a surgeon's scalpel. "You're right, this is a debacle. This entire legacy, this obsession with succession, with a name on a building, and it's worthless." He took a step toward them, his gaze unwavering. "I don't care about the company. I don't care about the inheritance. I am done. The only thing in this world that matters to me is in that room, fighting for his life. And the only person I want by my side is his mother." He looked directly at Marcus. "Get out, both of you. If you ever come near Claire or my son again, you'll find out what a man with nothing left to lose is capable of." They stared, stunned into silence by his complete abdication, before turning and leaving him for good. He walked into the NICU. the rhythmic beeping of the machines a somber soundtrack to the scene. Claire didn't turn. "I told you to leave me alone, Julian," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Please, just go." He stopped beside her, not touching her, just looking at their son. "I can't," he said softly. "I'm not leaving you. Not now, not ever." He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out the diamond engagement ring from his catastrophic proposal. Instead, he revealed a simple, thin gold band. Unadorned and humble, he held it in his palm for her to see. "I didn't buy this last night, Claire," he confessed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I bought this 2 months ago, the day after I saw you in the cafe." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with confusion. "I was already falling for you all over again. I wanted to ask you out, to try and rebuild what we'd lost. But I was a coward. I was so terrified of you rejecting me, the real me, that I couldn't do it." His confession was raw, stripped of all pretense. "And then the diagnosis came, and I saw a way, a selfish, horrible, cowardly way to bring you into my life without having to risk my heart. It was a crutch, a lie I used to hide from the truth. The truth is," he continued, his voice breaking, "I have loved you since I was a boy. I've loved you through 15 years of silence, and I've loved you every single second we've been together these past months." As proof, he turned the simple gold band over in his hand, showing her the inside. Her breath hitched. There, in delicate, tiny script, was a single engraved word: always. It was the word she had whispered to him under a willow tree all those years ago when he'd given her the sun locket, promising she'd wait for his letters. It was their word, a secret code from a forgotten time, a testament to a love that predated his desperation and the devastating lie. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she looked from the ring to his pleading eyes. She saw the raw, unvarnished sincerity there. She saw the proof that his love was not a recent invention, not a byproduct of gratitude, but an old and stubborn thing that had survived years of pressure and loneliness. She looked at their tiny son, so fragile in his incubator, a baby who needed them both whole and united. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt that had encased her heart like a shield of ice began to crack and melt away, replaced by a wave of forgiveness and a love that she finally allowed herself to feel. Amid the beeping machines and the quiet hum of the NICU, she nodded, a silent, tearful acceptance. 2 years later, the world was a different place. The scene was not a cold penthouse or a cramped apartment, but a warm, light-filled house in the leafy suburbs of Westchester, a home they had chosen together. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the air smelling of cut grass and blooming roses. In the lush green garden, their son, Leo, now a healthy, laughing toddler with his father's serious eyes and his mother's warm smile, chased butterflies with uncoordinated, joyous abandon. He was the living, breathing symbol of their tumultuous journey, a testament to survival and second chances. His laughter was the new, beautiful rhythm of their lives. Claire sat on a wooden swing, hanging from the branch of an old oak tree, the silver sun locket from her childhood gleaming at her throat against a simple summer dress. She was the picture of peace, her past anxieties a distant memory. Julian came and stood behind her, his hands gently pushing the swing in a slow, steady rhythm. They watched their son, a perfect and miraculous blend of them both, stumble and fall onto the soft grass, only to get up again, giggling. "I was so afraid back then," Claire said softly, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "I thought I was just a solution to your problem, a temporary fix." Julian stopped the swing and came around to kneel in front of her, taking both of her hands in his. He looked from her radiant face to the silver locket, then back into her eyes, his own full of a profound and settled love. He brought her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of reverence. "You were never the solution, Claire," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that still overwhelmed him after all this time. "You were never the answer to a question or the fix for a problem. He paused, his gaze intense and full of meaning. You were always the destination. He leaned in and kissed her, a long, slow kiss of profound gratitude and deep, abiding love, sealing a promise made not by a contract, but by two hearts that had finally found their way home. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in love again.